mesenteries as well. This time, this video, and maybe the next video in the anatomy series, I think is going to revolve around some of the arterial structures within the abdomen. There's a lot happening in a pretty compressed amount of space as far as blood distribution. So I don't want to try and shoehorn it or cram it into one single video. I want to give it the proper amount of attention that it deserves. So before we get started here with probably what's going to be part one of a two-part video, just wanted to say thank you to those of you who take the time to subscribe, and those of you who have been continuing to watch. I'm doing all I can to grow this audience with what I hope you all view to be good content. As always, I'm open to constructive criticism or feedback, and if you like this video, please leave a like. If you know that you want to see more videos like this, please do subscribe. And if you know of anybody else who enjoys anatomy and ASMR and would love those two things together, please feel free to share with a friend. Now, the typical plug out of the way, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Arteries of the abdomen. So we've got the abdominal aorta, which is this major structure, and it's called the abdominal aorta below the diaphragm, which we know from previous videos that we talked about. So prior to that, it's just the ascending aorta, really, up through this portion here. But then below the diaphragm is the abdominal aorta. So the abdominal aorta enters the abdomen at the T12 level through the aortic hiatus of the diaphragm before bifurcating or splitting at L4 into its terminal branches, the common iliac arteries. The abdominal aorta gives off the renal arteries, which we'll talk about on page right here. We'll go back one page. The renal arteries, which we talked about on this page here, splits off. It's the main blood supply for the kidneys. Gives off the renal arteries and three major trunks that supply the organs of the gastrointestinal system. And those three branches are: one, the celiac trunk. It supplies the structures of the foregut, the interior portion of the alimentary canal. The foregut consists of the esophagus, stomach, duodenum, liver, gallbladder, and pancreas, or at least portions of all of those. And that's going to be, the celiac trunk is going to be right here, this portion. The superior mesenteric artery, which is going to be here, that supplies the structures of the midgut, the duodenum, the distal portion, the jejunum and the ileum of the small intestine, the cecum and the appendix and the ascending colon and the right colic flexure, and the proximal one half of the transverse colon of the large intestine. And then we've got the inferior mesenteric artery here. It supplies the structures of the hindgut, the transverse colon, distal half, left colic flexure, descending and sigmoid colons, rectum and anal canal, upper portion. So between this branch, and this branch, that takes care of most of the intestines, for sure, as well as the esophagus, the stomach, and the liver, and the gallbladder. So a lot of those abdominal structures. I'm going to take a quick drink of water. So, moving on to the arteries of the abdominal wall, the superior and inferior epigastric arteries, so superior and inferior, form a potential anastomosis, or bypass for blood, basically where these two blood vessels come together and juncture at a common site from the subclavian and the femoral arteries. So superior epigastric is coming all the way down off the subclavian, and then the inferior epigastric is coming up from that femoral artery, coming up here. This effectively allows blood to potentially bypass the abdominal aorta. So what you need to know from this is basically that it's supplementary blood supply to the main structures of the abdominal aorta in ways that you wouldn't necessarily expect from the femoral and the subclavian. Alright, now we're shifting our attention back to the abdominal aorta. So this is more of a close-up section. Basically, we're taking from here to like right here, and we are super zooming in, not superimposing, zooming in. It says the abdominal aorta gives rise to 3 major unpaired trunks and the unpaired median sacral artery, as well as 6 paired branches. So let's go through these one at a time, I would say. We've got a 1 right and a 1 left. So 1R on the right looks to be the inferior, let me make sure I'm reading it right. Yeah, the inferior phrenic artery, which has a branch to the right superior suprarenal artery. And then the left side has is the superior suprarenal artery, which has a branch to the left superior suprarenal artery. Basically, the nomenclature here is descriptive of what it supplies. That's the thing that you need to know. 2, here is the celiac trunk, which we already talked about here. And then just to recap, that has the left gastric artery, the splenic artery, and the common hepatic artery, which you can remember services the liver and part of the intestine and the stomach. So a lot, again, a very, very important structure right here, vascularly, the celiac trunk. And then we've got a 3R and a 3L. And then I see 3L here. So on the left, it's going to be a part of this, the middle suprarenal artery. And then where's my 3R at? Oh, it's saying it's a pair. So then there's a right middle suprarenal and a left middle suprarenal. 4 right here coming off the front is going to be the superior mesenteric artery. And then 5R, so it's got a right and a left. And I think just to keep this picture from being too busy, it's got a right and left side. So the right and left renal arteries and the right and left inferior suprarenal arteries. 6R and 6L. So 6R and then 6L. The pairings of the lumbar arteries, 1st through 4th, which makes sense. Basically L1, L2, L3, L4. And then 7R, another pairing, 7R and 7L. Testicular and ovarian. I don't know why they did it like this instead of maybe just to show the pairing. And then here's the inferior mesenteric artery, which we talked about before. And then we've got 9R and 9L, common iliac, right common iliac, left common iliac, and then that branches out further into the external and internal iliac arteries. And then 10 is that median sacral artery right here at the bottom. Building out more specifically on the celiac trunk, so we're going back to the celiac trunk here and here, and really focusing on its vascular supply. So we've got everything else removed out of the way to see what specifically it goes to. And so we see the celiac trunk going to the splenic artery. We see it going to the common hepatic, which services the liver and the pancreas and part of the duodenum. I'm trying to simplify some of this because it's a very busy picture otherwise. But then it also contributes to the left gastric artery, so it goes to the stomach. And then the right gastric artery comes off of that as well. So it's servicing both upper and lower portions of the stomach, as well as the gastroduodenal artery. So that's going to hit part of the intestines as well as the back side of the stomach here. Really the core thing to remember, again, reading it. So I'll read this as we look at this picture. Supplies the structures of the foregut, the anterior portion of the alimentary canal. The foregut consists of the esophagus, which does not look like they've included here. No, they haven't included it here, but we can remember that the esophagus, the stomach, the duodenum, which is over here, the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas, and yeah, part of the spleen as well, or it leads into the splenic artery. Okay, and then here is specifically the arterial supply to the pancreas. And then, so these branches off of the celiac lead to a great pancreatic artery, the inferior pancreatic artery, the dorsal pancreatic artery. And with this being such a long structure, it makes sense that there's multiple vessels that service it instead of just one. And then going now to the superior mesenteric artery. So here, and then we see it again. Number 4 here. So coming off here and here. almost cut out of the way and what it supplies. So I'll go ahead and read this again while we go through this picture here. So it supplies the structures of the midgut, the distal portion of the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum, which it shows here kind of cut away, the cecum and the appendix, here, the right colic flexure. There's the right colic artery, so the right colic flexure, and the proximal 1/2 of the transverse colon, so through here. And looks like and then we'll go to the inferior mesenteric and then read about the anastomoses. So the inferior mesenteric artery, we'll read the skin, supplies the structures of the hindgut, the transverse colon, distal half, the left colic flexure, the descending and sigmoid colons, and then the anal canal, the upper portion of the anal canal right here. So it's basically taking these three structures that we talked about here and giving us greater representation of what we're looking at, like a more in-depth look at how they're being serviced. Okay, anastomoses within the abdomen. Three major anastomoses provide overlap in the arterial supply to the abdominal areas to ensure adequate blood flow. One between the celiac trunk and the superior mesenteric artery via the pancreaticoduodenal arteries. So between let's go ahead and look at it, the celiac trunk and the superior mesenteric artery. Let me find that again, superior mesenteric, okay. So yeah, between here and here, it can be an anastomosis. Between the superior and inferior mesenteric arteries, so between here and here, via the middle and left colic arteries, between the inferior mesenteric and the internal iliac arteries, so between here and here, via the superior and middle or inferior rectal arteries. And the fascinating thing about human anatomy is that this could differ, the anastomoses, from person to person as far as the vasculature. At the end of the day, the body doesn't necessarily care exactly that every person be exactly the same as much as it cares that the vasculature be in place for these organ systems. And we obviously see that in other cases for things like situs transversus and things like that where the body is internally flipped. Oh, that's a whole different wild condition to talk to you all about a different day. And then this is basically a recap of everything that we've already talked about with a different kind of picture. So since I don't want to be triply redundant, we'll go ahead and move on to the next portion. So the abdominal aorta and renal arteries. So actually it's going to give us the celiac trunk and the superior and inferior mesenteric arteries more in depth, or just, I guess you could call it in situ. So anterior view of the female abdomen, removed all organs except the left kidney and suprarenal gland. The abdominal aorta is the distal continuation of the thoracic aorta. It enters the abdomen at the T12 level and bifurcates at the common iliac arteries. So just another view. There's that aortic hiatus. There's the celiac trunk, which again we'll get more into. That superior mesenteric artery, we'll get more into that. The inferior mesenteric artery, and then the common iliacs, right and left common iliac, leading to the right internal iliac, the right external iliac, and then we actually also have the umbilical artery, the obturator artery, let's follow that in, and the inferior vesical artery coming off of that right internal iliac. And then we can see over here, we do have, and it's important to show the esophagus' proximity to the celiac trunk, since we remember that it's being partially receiving a blood supply. Okay, so we've got the left superior suprarenal artery, the left phrenic artery, the left middle suprarenal, left inferior suprarenal, left renal, left first lumbar. And we can remember 1, 2, 3, 4. Those four lumbar. The vasculature comes directly from the abdominal aorta there. Here is our left ovarian coming way down, and this would just be the testicular artery in men. There's the left ureter, the median sacral artery, the left iliolumbar artery, the left left superior gluteal artery, the left lateral sacral artery. Here's the sacral plexus, which will be a nerve video, a video that we talk about nerves on a different day. The left deep circumflex iliac artery. Say that 5 times fast. And then the left inferior epigastric artery. There also is, here's the femoral artery and vein, the obturator branch of the right epigastric artery. And then we have the uterine artery, the right middle rectal artery, the right internal pudendal artery, and the right inferior gluteal artery. And so that covers most everything coming off of that. And then we have the renal arteries. This is a left kidney anterior view. We kind of talked about this a little bit before, so I'm going to see if we can uncover anything new. It looks like we do have a few arteries that we didn't get to see necessarily before previously, like the interlobar artery, and that's between the medullary pyramids, which are these guys here. We've got the minor calyx and the major calyx. And then we have the anterior superior segmental artery. We've got interlobar arteries. Of course, the fibrous capsule surrounding the kidney. The branch of the posterior segmental artery. The anterior inferior segmental artery. There's that renal pelvis again. The inferior segmental leading to the ureter and the ureteral branches. And we've got a clinical box down here. I always enjoy these. I hope you all do too. Renal hypertension. The kidney is an important blood pressure sensor and regulator. A stenosis, or narrowing of the renal artery, reduces blood flow through the kidney and stimulates increased production of renin, an enzyme that cleaves angiotensin to form angiotensin 1. Subsequent cleavage yields angiotensin 2, which induces vasoconstriction and an increase in blood pressure. So the constriction. Renal hypertension must be excluded or confirmed when diagnosing high blood pressure. So basically it's saying here that if there is a stenosis at this arterial level, it can cause a full body response to a regional issue because this is a part of your blood pressure regulation system. So this picture here is showing a clear stenosis or a very clear narrowing. It's like a cinched water hose or a kinked water hose. Stenosis of the right renal artery, visible via arteriography. Alright, now getting more into the celiac trunk. So we already talked about the full distribution a couple pages ago, but we've got an anterior view, and opened up is the lesser omentum, so it's kind of set back. And what's been incised and pulled back is the greater omentum. The celiac trunk arises from the abdominal aorta at the level of T12L1, which makes sense because that's right where it comes out, and that's just below that. So right at that level. So a few more arterial structures maybe that we can get into just coming off of that celiac trunk. We've got the cystic artery, the proper hepatic. We've got the common hepatic here, which is one of the big ones. The right gastric, the posterior superior pancreaticoduodenal, and then the gastroduodenal coming off there. Another one, we've got the anterior superior pancreaticoduodenal, the right gastroomental, which makes sense, it's serving the stomach, and the omentum, gastroomental. We've got the splenic artery kind of tucking in here, and then we can see it through over to the spleen. The left gastroomental, and just the left gastric itself. And then here is the celiac trunk with a focus on the pancreas, duodenum, and spleen. So now we've got the stomach removed and the lesser omentum removed. So same picture, just these two features taken off. And then let's see, what else can we see that's different? We can now see the right gastric artery when we couldn't before. We can visualize the supraduodenal. We can see the posterior superior pancreaticoduodenal. Let's see, the inferior pancreaticoduodenal here. Let's see, we can see the inferior pancreaticoduodenal. And then there's one of those anastomoses that we were talking about between the superior mesenteric and the inferior pancreatic. Let's see. I think that's what's new, different between the two pictures. And then we've got the superior and inferior mesenteric arteries. Let me look and see here. So we've got the veins. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to transition into the veins next. That makes sense. Okay, so the superior and inferior mesenteric arteries. Partially removed is the stomach, the duodenum, and the peritoneum. Reflected back is the liver and the gallbladder. And it says, note, the middle colic artery has been truncated. The superior and inferior mesenteric arteries arise from the aorta opposite L1 and L3, respectively. Okay? So it's telling us the exact levels. And there's an incredible amount of vasculature that you can see here that goes to the intestines, both small and large. And again, we've got the duodenum kind of set back, transected. But we've got a pretty clear line of sight on the jejunum and the ileum here further down. And I want to see what we can see that we haven't seen so far. So we see the right colic artery. We've got the marginal artery, the ileocolic artery, the ileocolic artery with the colic branches. So it's going to the colon. And then we've got the ileal branches here. So there's the ileocolic. Colic branches. No, there's the colic branches, sorry. There's the ileal branches. The posterior cecal artery going down to the cecum. The anterior cecal artery going to the front of the cecum. And, we can see the jejunal artery. Multiple branches here. And then the ileal arteries, multiple branches here. And then this portion here called the vasa recta. Let's see, inferior mesenteric artery. So this was showing both the superior and inferior. This is more of a focus on just the inferior. So I want to highlight anything that's different here. The superior rectal we could not really see before, or it wasn't highlighted. Here's the sigmoid arteries going to the sigmoid colon. There's that aortic bifurcation, which we talked about. And then we've got what else? I mean, there's the inferior mesenteric already. So yeah, nothing new that we haven't really covered. Now, part 2 for the video that I want to just give you all a preview, I suppose. Hopefully you'll come back, or hopefully you've enjoyed the first one enough to come back, is that we're getting into the venous structures. So it's not quite simple enough. It's a little dismissive to just say, oh, well, these are the arteries and the veins directly match it, because as you remember, there's the azygous system and the hemiazygous. So it's not completely the same. And then we've got the superior and inferior mesenteric veins, and it'll show how it runs with that. And then we've got also the lymphatics, which I think we'll cover next time as well. Yeah, we'll cover the lymphatics, or maybe the lymphatics may be its own video at this point. And then the nerves. Okay, so we're going to get in the veins next time. So I feel like this is a good place to stop, because otherwise we'll end up having an hour-plus long video. And, if that's something you enjoy, then that's something I'll take into consideration. But usually I try and keep them to about a half hour so that they're both not so short that you feel like you just clicked on it and it's over, but also that's like, man, this video is dragging on. Don't want that either. So, as always, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy. I'm open to commentary